In today's segment, we're going to go over a video clip of Alex from Kiskeya life that was featured on Educated Traveler. In this clip, Alex gives brief presentations of the demographics of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And so we're going to go over this clip, and I'm going to give some commentary with some notes that I put together today. So I just wanted to start with just giving a brief overview. So the history of the Dominicans, that begins with the early Spanish colonial period, which started in 1492. 1496, the city of Santo Domingo was founded on the Spanish colony. The history for the Haitian people will not begin until 1625, when the French established a colony on Tortuga Island. Later, in 1641, the French established settlements in northwestern Hispaniola. So there was differences between these two colonies. For example, in Santo Domingo had an export slave economy, whereas in the Spanish colony, Santo Domingo had evolved into cattle ranching, meat, and contraband. And this was largely due to Spain abandoning Santo Domingo for 3 centuries. So we have to understand that there is a demographic reality. History is not black and white, it's multifaceted. The conflict between Haitian and the Dominican ethnic group is the result of different social and cultural experiences, which produces confrontations. It's important to understand the differences in demographics between these two ethnic groups, as they have different founding populations. So with that said, let's go through the video.
After Columbus, the island was in Spanish hands and was named Santo Domingo in honor of the Catholic priest Santo Domingo de Guzman, and the inhabitants were called Dominicans.
The Dominican people existed before the Dominican state. In the early 1600s, before the French occupied the western side of Hispaniola, the Dominican people were thanked by the King of Spain for fighting off the Dutch pirates, and it's seen in a letter dedicated to Dominicans, which today is preserved in a museum in Seville, in Spain.
The island became a refueling station for the gold galleons coming from the continent, but by the 17th century, French pirates had settled in the northwest, and the Spanish didn't like that because they were raiding these galleons. In 1697, Spain...
Okay, so let's kind of pause it there for a sec. So, when I see a lot of presentations, they usually start with the Treaty of Ryswick of 1697, but we gotta understand that it happens much sooner before that. So it begins with the devastations of Osorno, which was 1605 through 1606, and it was the King of Spain had ordered the governor of Hispaniola at the time, Antonio de Osorio, to depopulate the western part of the island and to move the Spanish inhabitants to the nearby part of Santo Domingo. It was a way to control smuggling developed by the French, Dutch, and English ships on the north and northwest coast of the island. The application of this order was used by the French to begin occupying the western part of Hispaniola, as it was left fairly unpopulated by the Spanish. So when the French settled in Tortuga Island on 1625, this would split the history of the island of Hispaniola into two.
Let France have their small share of the island, and 80 years later even divided the island among them. So by the end of the 18th century, it was now called Saint-Domingue and Santo Domingo. The inhabitants, the Dominicans and French settlers, lived for the most part in peace with one another, in a shared economic growth, and the island became Europe's source for sugar and coffee, and that made it stinking rich, particularly on the French side. It was this place that made France a global power. But making sugar takes, well, slaves. By 1789, there were about 80,000 white landowners and free mixed people of color, as well as 15,000 slaves. But in sharp contrast, on the French side, the slave population had swelled to 500,000, ruled over by a white population that numbered only 32,000. Now in Saint-Domingue, the slaves were seen as cheap, disposable laborers, and disposed of they were. The treatment of slaves became a virtual, well, holocaust. So with 500,000 slaves and only a handful of captors, well, the place turned into a bomb.
So let's go over a couple of things. The island of Hispaniola, there was a small minority of whites. This was largely due to the mass depopulation events that had occurred. Many Europeans left in search of riches in Mexico and other places when Spain abandoned Santo Domingo. Many also left the island after the 1805 massacre and the invasion of 1822. This is why we always had a smaller population density compared to other Latin American countries. Now let's go over Saint Domingue and their plantation economy. France began an exploitative sugar economy. French imported 500,000 slaves by 1791. The French began this practice towards the middle of the 17th century and continued this through the 18th century. Whereas Santo Domingo by 1820 had 7,000 slaves, in comparison to 500,000 slaves imported by the French in 1791. Spain had brought a few thousand slaves in 1503 to Santo Domingo, and that importation of slaves had ceased by 1540, when the Castilian royalty had already closed in 1535 in Santo Domingo. The island began to be abandoned by the Spanish to go to Cuba, Mexico, and Peru. So let's go over the free mixed population. And this is in general history of the Caribbean, the long 19th century. In 1769, Santo Domingo had 30,862 free people of color. In 1753, Saint-Domingue had 4,732 free people of color.
What is now known as the Haitian Revolution took about 13 years from start to finish and affected pretty much the entire island in violent episodes of wars and mutual genocides, interrupted by sporadic bouts of peace. The main characters were of course the rebels on one side and the royalist colonists on the other, but there were supporting characters as well, such as the Dominicans, the Spanish, and even the British, who hoped that in all the mess they might grab a piece of the sugar action. Even the United States meddled a bit, supplying all sides with weapons. History really hasn't changed on that one. Looking for allies wherever they could, the rebels fought for, well, whatever side was on their side. So at times it was for Spain against France, then with the French against Spain, and then against Napoleon, who basically wanted to conquer all of America. In short, it was a massively violent and, well, very confusing war. In the end, the rebels prevailed, and independence from France was declared in 1804. They had achieved something no slave revolt ever had, completely overwhelming their captors, establishing their own nation, and, well, incidentally thwarting Napoleon's advance into the continent. You're welcome, America. They were free at last. But then, a man named Dessalines declared himself the de facto emperor of Haiti and ordered the genocide of almost all white colonists. He also marched into the Dominican side to chase down a few French stragglers, and on his way, he just raced through several Dominican towns, continuing his genocide. This massacre of French colonists and Dominicans changed the global impression of the Haitian Revolution. Instead of a brave struggle by an oppressed people along the lines of Spartacus, the world saw it as a murderous rampage by a few mad slaves and refused to acknowledge the new nation. Suddenly, everyone feared the slaves, giving new fuel to racism, hate. And this created a global racial hostility, well, that we can still feel today. But what comes around goes around, and Dessalines was murdered by his own people for being, well, a maniacal tyrant. Inspired by Dessalines' emperor complex, other self-styled emperors and kings began, a Game of Thrones, vying for power and killing each other and their own, declaring kingdoms and building castles. At one point, Haiti even split into two kingdoms. And all of this took place with the looming threat of a coming winter. Sooner or later, France would come back. So in all of this, what about the Dominicans? Well, for the past decade, they had been conquered in no particular order by the Haitians and the English and the Spanish and the French, and with each conqueror bringing death and famine and illness. In 1821, an independence from Spain was declared, and Santo Domingo was renamed to Spanish Haiti. Plans were drafted to join Simon Bolivar and his new nation of Gran Colombia, but that fell through. Suddenly, a peaceful unification with neighboring Haiti looked like a good idea. After all, by 1822, Haiti seemed rich and powerful and sort of stable now under new administration, this guy called Jean-Pierre Boyer, and Boyer was more than willing to help out the Dominicans, and so he peacefully marched into Spanish
Haiti became independent in 1804. That was a series of revolts
because
against
Boyer
the
was just
French
another tyrant.
due to their exploited um, sugar economy and how they enslaved and abused enslaved people of African descent. Um, when the Haitians under Dessalines went into the Spanish side, remember during that time, um, the Spanish colony was under the French, under the Treaty of Basel, and this was until 1808 when Juan Sanchez Ramirez ousted the French. Now, the sentiment that the Haitians had during this time, you can see the attitude written in their declaration. Um, for example, Toussaint Louverture wanted to have a connection with the French, and you can see a total opposite written in their declaration. They wanted to have no association with the French, and when they went over to uh, the Spanish colony, then under French control, they wanted to um, be rid of French influence on the island. So this will lead into the Mocha massacre and burning of Santiago in 1805. So this would be the beginning of the sentiment against the Haitian ethnic group. So now let's go into the 1822 occupation. Under Boyer, there was concerns of an external threat, France attempting to retake possession of their former colony. The unification between 1822 and 1844 failed for a number of reasons, and it's summarized in two manifestos that I always mention, the first written January 1st and the second written January 16, 1844. And I'm going to summarize the following. The island brought into debt due to the French indemnity, the expropriation of all communal lands, the rural code, the forced policy of plantation to raise money for the indemnity. Just to bring up also, Boyer trying to invigorate the economy using similar policies that was done before him, such as with Kiskeya and also Louverture. And the last one is the forced military occupation. So the unification failed for several reasons. One, the fail to revive the plantation economy. Boyer failed to unify the island, which one of the reasons was to protect against an external threat and to be rid of slavery. There was also a desire to align with the Grand Columbia, but that fell through due to Haiti having a larger army, and at the time, Santo Domingo lacked an army, navy, and stable treasury, and also had a lower population density.
In fact, many historians on both sides feel that what was about to happen was the ultimate spark in lighting the Dominican-Haitian conflict as we know it today. You see, what the Dominicans didn't know was that a fleet of French ships had forced Boyer to agree to pay France 150 million francs as war reparations for the revolutions. That's about 20 billion US dollars today. At 10 times the annual national income, there was no way Haiti would be able to pay this. But Boyer agreed because he had an ace up his sleeve: the Dominicans. He had just agreed to pay the French when he marched into Spanish Haiti, intending to use the unexploited riches of the Dominicans to pay France back. And for the next 22 years, he and his military ruled the island with an iron fist, bleeding it dry, even forcing conscripted Dominicans to commit atrocities on their own people. The resentment that grew within the Dominicans, well, it's never really gone away.
So
By 1838, resistance to the tyranny had grown, and by 1843, Boyer was toppled by a combined Dominican-Haitian rebellion. The Haitian rebels took hold of their side, and the Dominican rebels took control of their side and declared their independence from Haiti in 1844. After so many invasions and oppressions, the Dominicans were free at last. It is no wonder then that the main Dominican Independence Day that is celebrated is the one from this occupation. It was the most costly. Unfortunately, that's not where history ends. Over the next decades, the Dominicans were faced with plenty of other tyrants of their own, and more invasions. Spain tried to conquer back its lost lands. The US occupied twice, and there were at least 4 more Haitian invasions until 1874 when Haiti finally recognized the Dominican Republic as its own independent nation.
Right there.
And then Rafael Trujillo came
The
along in 1930. Like most tyrants of his time, Stalin, Hitler, he decided to
for,
purge all
a number
those
of
he seemed unfit to live in his regime. So
First,
Trujillo
it was
ordered
the
the killing
result
as
of
many
social
Haitians
and
as possible, the
social,
purpose of these purges
economic,
being
and
the
political
Parsley
reasons,
Massacre. Meanwhile, on the Haitian
such
side,
as
things didn't go
constant
so well either.
migrations to the
While
border, treaty violations, taking of jobs, which created economic tensions, and reported stealing farm animals and cattle. Also during this time, during the 1930s, around 70,000 Haitian workers were expelled from Cuba, who returned to immigrate en masse to the DR. Since they did not find reintegration policies in their country, contributing to a swell number of workers of Haitian origin. Let's go through that real quick. Um, uh, Haiti paid off the indemnity in 1883, and in 1947, they paid off bank loans
France
and other
reduced the
interest.
debt of 90 million francs.
So let's go over the debt real
120
quick,
years, until
okay, for both
1947
sides.
to pay it all back
So
with
on the
interest.
DR side, it will begin in 1869, when Bias signed the Heartmount loan contract, initiating the DR's misadventures with international finance and the eventual first U.S. occupation in 1916. In 1888, Federal enacted the Western Drop loan with an Amsterdam bank plunging the DR deeper into debt. So, in the Haitian side, this began when Haiti, right after the last indemnity payment in 1883, it went through a period of excessive political and financial chaos. The 1915 U.S. occupation took place following years of social and economic instability, with Haiti after the assassination of the Haitian president at the time, Vilbert Guillaume said.
Haiti then went through a series of good and bad leaders, as well as an occupation by
So
the
we can
US,
also
all
say
of which
that
caused
the
only
years
more
after
debts. And to make matters worse,
1986
in 1957,
contributed to
one
the
Francois
moderate
Duvalier
debt
and his
that
family
Haiti-
came along, who
that
became the
Haiti
worst
has.
dictator Haiti
And
had ever
you
seen.
can see
And that's
this
saying a lot,
reported in two
driving
reports.
Haiti even
One,
deeper
Mission
into
to
debt
Haiti,
for its
the
personal gain.
1949
He found
report,
people in black
and
misery.
the recent
They're still
report you
trying
can
to
find on
recover today.
ResearchGate, Haiti, a political and economy analysis. Real quick, when it comes to Trujillo, Trujillo made his mistakes. But one thing that I have to bring up,
Now, Trujillo died in 1961, and the
you have to
Trujillo
give him
dynasty
credit
reigned until
for bringing the
1986.
DR out of
Haiti
debt
saw much
and
infighting
also
since then,
for
until the UN
its
intervention in
modernization.
2004, which ended in 2017. But this
So let's go over a few things. Um, so the
Despite these
sentiment
historic and
that
financial
the
ups and
Dominican
downs,
ethnic group
both
will
countries
have
have lived in relative peace for at
against
least
the Haitian
140
ethnic group
years now.
will
But
be
for
summarized
700
with the
years,
following.
the Dominican collective psyche was conditioned to
One, a
expect and repel
desire of not
invasions,
wanting to
mostly from their own
assume
neighbor. And while not
responsibility for Haiti's social and economic problems, the migrant crisis, and also something that's not mentioned a lot, and that is the total of 6,200 kilometers of land that was ceded to Haiti in an effort to resolve border conflicts. Uh, Aggression and invasion attempts, the 22-year occupation, and the Mocha massacre and burning of Santiago in 1805.
not so much a racial issue at the outset, for many it has become that as well. And that's not to say that with all the back and forth, both nations did not find ways and reasons to coexist and cooperate. 17 years after the Dominicans declared their independence from Haiti, Haiti sent reinforcements to help the Dominicans fight their war against Spain. During both U.S. occupations in 1916 and 1965, Dominican and Haitian rebels fought in solidarity against the United States. And when the earthquake hit Haiti in 2010, Dominican troops were the first to arrive on scene to help. To this day, the Dominican Republic is helping Haiti by providing free education, medical help, and disaster relief.
So just keep
Now,
in
it can
mind,
be argued that the people in both nations were
we have
thrust into this
to
dilemma against their
acknowledge
wills.
that the
Victims
island
of,
that is
well,
shared
the
by two
Game of
nations
Thrones
today
of
has
imperialism.
two
On
entirely
one side are the
different
Dominicans, who were
demographic
originally
origins
inhabited
that
the
sets
entire
the two
island, and were then forcefully
apart.
split up by Spain and France, only to be oppressed. And on the other, slaves, who against their will were forcefully removed from Africa and brought here, only to be oppressed.
Okay, let's go over a few things real quick. So with the Restoration War,
With such vast differences of origins,
Um,
languages, religions, and
Haiti
ideologies
did not
between the
have a
two,
direct
it is then no
involvement,
surprise why
but
these two
they
nations
supplied
often seem to be, well,
weapons.
at odds with one
Um,
another. Considering the historic
Also,
events that
when
led
it
to our
comes
current
to
situation, it is also
the
obvious
occupation,
why a unified island
we have to
would
keep
never
in
work.
mind that both nations have fought with the intent to preserve their sovereignty.
But the past also shows that both can live together in peace if both sovereignties, their borders, and their individual rights are respected by other nations.
Okay, so closing out, let's go over a few things to close out. We have to understand that the sentiment did not give rise the same way as in the U.S. And it's more accurate to say that it is an ethnic, that it's an ethnic conflict that is rooted in social and economic implications. We need to have a balanced perspective on our history, as Oldie Rivera has stated previously. Propaganda can go in any direction. With time in the study of population genetics, everything will become clear. By becoming more informed, we can better understand our world view. So that's all for today. Like, comment, and share. Please add your thoughts. Don't be reactionary. Follow me on YouTube at Antillean Confederation and on Instagram. And until the next bill.